So, since starting this channel, I have not had the opportunity to watch as much YouTube as I typically do. I've been busy producing videos, doing research, and more research. But typically, I like to find something to fall asleep to, and was going to do that with this video between Garry Nolan and Robinson Earhart. But it was too darn interesting. It was fascinating. It was the best interview I'd ever seen of Garry Nolan. He shares a lot of great information. And there are a few moments that I just have to point out to you and give my thoughts. So let's get into it.
So the question is, before looking at any of the specific evidence that we might have, how likely should we think it is that over the course of the last 4 billion years, or even now, extraterrestrials would have come to Earth?
So, I mean, that's actually the question that I pose to people is the question is not, are they here, but can they be here? And the answer is yes, they can be here. And so you just have to look at NASA and what all of the exoplanet analysis is showing is that the conditions for life exist everywhere. I mean, absolutely everywhere. Doesn't mean they'd look like us. It just means that the raw material to create life is not unique to this planet. And so, one of the actual ideas is that we didn't come here, we didn't get here, or we're not here because we happened here. But there's this idea of that life has been traveling across the galaxy.
Panspermia?
The panspermia. Yes, exactly. And people go, oh, that's crazy. Well, they just resurrected a worm that was 30,000 years old from the ice.
Did they really?
Yeah. They just did. And they just showed recently that actually the substrata miles down in the Earth is filled with life.
Miles down?
Miles down.
Bacteria?
Bacteria that divide every 10,000 years.
Oh, wow.
Okay, that they're basically frozen in time and that they are so slow growing, and yet that's their mode of action. So,
and we already know that there are creatures like tardigrades that can survive essentially any environment.
So imagine you're a planet that has life on it, and another planet comes whizzing by, cracks you open, huge chunks of you go, splatter across the local galactic arm, and you eventually end up circling another sun, and you eventually, like an asteroid, end up hitting a planet that is, fertile possibility for life. So that's the panspermia. People say, oh.
And yes, it is the panspermia. So, a couple of interesting things I'd like to point out real quick. When he talked about the 30,000-year-old worm that was resurrected, and no offense to Garry Nolan, but I actually had to fact check it myself because it just sounded too wild. And it is indeed absolutely true. I could not believe it. So for me, the point of this is just that we are still learning so much about our own planet, about life in general. So what really drives me crazy in science is how some people just make assumptions that something is not possible, couldn't be possible, extraterrestrial life, non-human intelligences. It just seems to be this no possibility allowed for these options when we show almost every time I open a browser some new amazing discovery that rewrites everything we know. And this was just a great example of it. Let me know what you think. Okay, we're going to move on to the next clip now.
Oh, come on, you can't have it. Well, every piece of metal that you're wearing right now came from an exploded nova from several billion years ago that became a gas, coalesced into another sun, and created a planetary disk or a pre-planetary disk that then condensed into planets. So it took several billion years to make the metal that you're wearing today. So why can't it be that life could move from one place to another, and so that life is everywhere? So, the point is that it only took, once life established on Earth's 4 billion years old. I don't know, life was a couple of billion years or so old. It only took 2 billion years for us to arise eventually out of the non-sentient animal life. Why couldn't it happen elsewhere if there's a billion other planets out there that have life? So I just don't get the pushback. I mean, the answer is there's not evidence yet of it. There's evidence that it could happen because the seeds of the opportunity are there. But we're waiting for the something to arrive that shows that, let's say there was life on Mars, right? That if there was life on Mars, or there's life on one of the moons of Jupiter, which have the oceans, the ice oceans, but clearly liquid water underneath. I think the chance of us knowing that life can be other than on Earth is probably only a few decades away.
Okay, so there's some I definitely agree with, some that I think he's just playing it a little bit safe. Yes, it would be amazing that we all accept that life is ubiquitous in the solar system. I think that's exactly where we're going to land. We constantly are finding things like organic molecules, amino acids on meteorites. We just had an episode on Bennu and how it had many of the amino acids present. And I think what we're going to find is that because we have these reactions in space, stellar nucleosynthesis, exploding materials everywhere, and it's in a very energetic, chaotic at times environment, that there's going to be creation or catalyzation of certain molecules. And I believe they may involve plasmoids, as some of you may know from watching some of my other videos. And from there, they can basically, kind of like a star, get exploded out everywhere, end up on planets. It could happen a whole variety of ways. But I think it is going to be common knowledge soon that the biochemical foundation is going to be all over the solar system. I bet we find out in the next year that Mars has life, as we would call it. And it's just going to revolutionize the way we look, not just at our planet ourselves, but the solar system as a whole. Excellent points and truly fascinating stuff. Let's keep going.
So the question that I would ask you then, because I think that this would significantly raise our prior probability for there being life elsewhere in the galaxy universe, let alone the galaxy, is should we expect that life needs to be carbon based or require water, or how do you think about this?
Well, I think from a Bayesian prior, the answer is the probability is 1 that it can happen with carbon, right? So we know it can happen with carbon and oxygen. And actually, this is interesting. Something I was thinking about the other day. The majority of our body is made up of carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, maybe a couple of other low mass elements. What does that mean? Those were amongst the first elements that were created at the instantiation of the universe.
Mhm.
So the fundamental...
Before you go on, for our listeners, that's because a lot of the heavier elements were created in supernova.
In supernova. They needed the compaction of the supernova, the fusion events that were occurring. So the essential material required to create life existed probably only a few, maybe a billion years. I don't even know what the numbers are, but very soon after the universe cooled sufficiently. So that's the first part. But something else happened at the start of the universe. As the universe was instantly expanding, there was an opportunity for...
We're going to just pause it there real quick because I want to point out that he's right. 90% of what humans are made of are carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen. You can remember it by the acronyms. Cows have orange noses. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, CHON. And so let's say it's a billion years after the supposed creation or Big Bang of the universe. So that leaves us with 13 billion years to create essentially us. And I think it's interesting because if we had the elements necessary for what we know as life, and there could be other forms or versions out there, that there could be life forms that are way, way, way older than us that could be very similar in terms of their biochemistry. And it seems that it would make not just perhaps common sense that this would be the case, but that perhaps we could be descendants of this type of biological life form since we had the necessary elements so long before. So he's going to talk about something next that really just made me happy. You'll see. You'll see.
Plasma and energy to have nearly every organizational structure possible. So take the entire mass of everything in the universe and now compact it down to the size of the galaxy as it's expanding. And what you get are organizational energies that could have just by chance been life. And if any of them had the ability to make more copies of themselves with that, and that actually is a hypothesis of a famous physicist, Boltzmann. So these are called Boltzmann brains. So his idea was that there was organizational plasmas and energies that just by chance, because you had every possible organization that could have been of those energies, and you could have actually created consciousness or something that acted like life as far back as when the universe first started.
Yeah, no, Boltzmann brains are
Okay, so that was just a wow bingo moment. I really just was surprised to hear him talk about plasma in that manner. I know that other people do. I've not heard him yet talk in that way. Maybe this is common knowledge, but I just thought it was a really interesting point that during a time when the universe was full of plasma, of all this energy, that every combination, every dynamic was possible. And wouldn't it seem just as likely, essentially, that some combination of it could have formed some sort of consciousness? Perhaps it may not be the same consciousness that we have. Perhaps it's more advanced. I mean, I don't think we know because we haven't primarily been looking at this very seriously. I'm hoping that that will change in the near future. And it seems like people are coming around to at least asking good questions, and hopefully we'll get good answers wherever that may, lie. But I was just super fascinated about his take on it. And when you watch this whole video for yourself, will be linked in the description below. It was an interesting interview, not just because Garry Nolan is a fascinating presenter, but because the host himself definitely came from a more skeptical perspective. In fact, I think he said that he'd had 250 kind of podcasts so far and has not dove into the topic of UAPs or this sort of thing. And Garry Nolan was his first, and it was a great choice. So it was really interesting to see kind of how little he knew at times about the phenomenon and just moments where you can see his world expand, his mind shift a little bit. That was also a very enjoyable thing about the interview. So I'll let you watch this next part.
are quite fascinating. The idea that based on these random thermodynamic fluctuations, if the universe is infinite, then we should much more likely than not actually be Boltzmann brains, because there would be a nearly infinite amount of them, but only ostensibly a significantly smaller number of real flesh, blood, and bone brains. And that's a novel form of extraterrestrial than I had that I had not considered.
Yeah, so it's a hypothesis. It's a brain experiment, if you will. But it's you look at it and go, well, yeah, maybe consciousness has been around longer than even planets were or suns.
One thing that's really fascinating about this
Maybe consciousness has been around longer than maybe even planets or the sun. Suns, I suppose. I absolutely love it. Just, it may not be true. It may be true, but at least here we have a well respected scientist asking big questions. And it's from questions that experiments are developed and hypotheses are created. It's just so refreshing to see this.
This idea is that undoubtedly Boltzmann brains should be considered extraterrestrials.
Yeah.
And while I mentioned at the outset of this interview, and you would agree with me, of course, I think, so maybe I shouldn't say of course, but that most of academia poo-poos the idea of extraterrestrials, Boltzmann brains remain a serious thorn in the side of physicists.
Yeah.
Because our theories point to their existence, but it results in this very problematic sort of paradoxical thinking, because we have to assume then that it's much more likely than not that we are aliens,
Right.
that we are Boltzmann brains.
Right.
So that's funny.
I mean, when people poo-poo it or whatever, I frankly just start ignoring them. I consider it. I again, it's the difference between evidence and proof. It's as long as it's still on the table, we should have the conversation. We can assign a probability if we want, but dismissing it outright is inappropriate for a scientist. I mean, that makes you a dogmatic individual. That makes you a priest. It doesn't make you a scientist. And anybody who takes that tack continuously might as well just give back their PhD, because they've basically violated the oath of what it is that a scientist is supposed to do.
Right. I can understand.
So that is just so well put. And it's definitely in alignment with how I feel that so many scientists have, instead of continue to explore the wonders of this world, continue to push the boundaries, continue to ask questions, even if they sound ridiculous, do experiments, find out things. You never know what you might find. Oftentimes, a person's ignorance could be kind of their best asset, because they may try experiments and science that we're told is not possible, and yet they find a way. So I like his confidence in everything. I think that he is very wise to not let people who can't even, excuse me, entertain questions, that he's just like, whatever. You're clearly not a scientist. You're a priest of dogma, essentially.
The viewpoint that we should, for instance, assign a very low probability to the possibility that the multiple dimensions in the many worlds theory of quantum mechanics are causally connected and beings could travel between them. But it seems absolutely wrong to rule this out as an in principle possibility.
Yeah.
So I'm with you that people should. It does not make sense for scientists to be atheists or extraterrestrialists in this case.
I think you've heard the similar things. Well, Thomas Kuhn and the Kuhnian revolution, that, ideas, bump up against reality, or reality bumps up against people's former ideas. And then suddenly everything changes. And on the other side of that cliff are everybody now assumes that it was right. And how could anybody have seen it as anything different? Gandhi has a similar thing. First they laugh at you, first they mock you, then they fight you, etc. I forget what the steps are, but the same idea being that it requires somebody or groups of somebodies to be steadfast and holding on to the value of an idea until it's formally disproven. And
it's very, I guess, well said when they talk about how in science you almost need a generation to pass on before you can have a real revolution of ideas, because it seems to be the case that dogma always creeps into fields, which is very anti-science, if you ask me, and how it is really important just to kind of keep asking those questions, regardless if it's popular. That is kind of how I look at science. I just ask questions, try to find answers, and see what's available out there. My opinions, just like everyone, should change with time. If your opinions don't change, you're not really transforming typically. You're not really trying to stay up on the information, trying to stay um, kind of improved, I guess is a way to put it.
Those unidentified submerged
Oh,
objects.
really?
And he takes hundreds of stories that have been collected over the decades. He's done all the nitty-gritty research, details each of them, but he's a fantastic writer, so he interweaves with his own kind of humor and writing. So it's an engaging read. It's not just a read of facts. Then there's Jacques Vallée, who wrote a book called Wonders in the Sky. And what he did was work with a librarian, an of international history, who went back through the records. God knows how they found this stuff. Hundreds, thousands of years, finding examples of events that we would today classify as a UFO, but written by the generals, the historians, the kings, the scientists of the time, and recorded on parchment or literature, in the literature. One of the most fantastic is Alexander the Great in one of his battles. These bright shields showed up in the sky above us. And we saw it as an omen of our eventual win. There's a story in Japan of an object that basically washes up on shore, and a woman gets out of it. It's weird. And this is where someone like Jacques Vallée comes in and tells us, you need to forget about all this alien stuff, even interdimensional stuff. You're dealing with a phenomena that almost acts like a form of consciousness, which, as he puts it, fantastic thing is that to them, reality is negotiable. So again, what you're really talking about, as he presents it, is something like a Boltzmann brain, some sort of force that has an ability to make itself be seen as almost anything it wants to. And his hypothesis or thesis is that, back when we were incredibly primitive, we saw these things as the spirits in the forest. Then we saw them as gods. Then we have God, right? We don't believe in God necessarily anymore. Plenty of people do. I'm not disparaging it. Now we believe in technology, and aliens represent technology. So maybe what we're dealing with is something that is just saying, I'm here. Those of you who are smart enough to recognize what it is that you see, I can engage with you. But you are not alone. So the constant message across time is you're not alone.
And what a wonderful message. I actually did not know that Jacques Vallée felt that way. And if you've been following this channel since its inception, you've probably seen me dabble in some of these ideas that I'm definitely going to have to deep dive more into, especially the connection of consciousness, plasma, UAPs, non-human intelligence. But my working theory is also that even if they don't directly interact with us, that they're able to affect us in a way by shifting electromagnetic fields, by not only creating beautiful sites that are transcendental, but also ones in which their electromagnetic fields can influence us and perhaps change our perception of reality. Perhaps even do that without a glowing orb. I'm sure almost anything is possible when it comes to plasma. It's kind of funny. It seems like you see all these different scientists in the field of UAP, and it's typically a different scope of science that led them to UAPs. And it almost seems to be like this meeting spot for different scientists that are open, wanting to get to the truth of their subject, their science, and yet so many of them end up having to deal with UAPs because they do really kind of pull different phenomenons together and just create this kind of thorn that has to be addressed to truly understand something because it raises so many questions. And what a great message. It just wants to let you know we're here. If you haven't seen the video I just released last week, I'm assuming, uh, be sure to check it out. We look at religion and just different things that plasma could have manifested itself as the burning bush, the Eye of Ra, things of that nature. And, you know, I really loved that video. It was a fun one to do. Okay, let's continue.
An extraterrestrial craft. So I take your point. That is an interesting.
But how about this? So, we talked about, I mean, I see you, and you are, really just a collection of particles that have no actual form, right? You just, at a higher level, you have matter, and I perceive you as a person. But at the end of the day, there's nothing there. You're
Yeah.
just a bunch of waves, and we interact with each other through waves. Well, what happens if there's senses below yet still our full understanding using physics that are just on the edge of believability, that are actually the manner by which these things interact? So there's, and let's address one thing. There's claimed telepathy with these things. Well, I don't think that means it's magic. I just think that means it's a kind of technology that we don't. I mean, I can, there are devices that can transmit sound into your head from a distance, right? Use the resonance cavity and transmit sound, to you. So, again, Elon Musk is making a neural link. And maybe a sufficiently advanced civilization can reach into your brain with electromagnetics very finely targeted and can manipulate your brain in a way that allows you to hear or see things.
I think it's safe to assume that if a non human intelligence entity from somewhere else, if they're able to come here to interact with us, they would certainly, in my opinion, have the technology to do just that. It's such a common thread we see in encounter stories about telepathy. Now, whether it's something they use a particular technology like a handheld device in order to do it, or if it's something that they have implanted, perhaps like a Neuralink, or even just a skill that they have mastered over time, it's a fascinating concept, and I think he's spot on there. So let me know what you think about a couple of the clips and my thoughts. I hope you watch the whole thing, and I want to hear what you think about the whole entire podcast. Let me know after you watch it. I just wanted to jump on here real quick, share a few things, and until next time, take care.